Hello. Okay. Hello. Nice to meet you. And first of all, thank you very much. And I'm very honored to make a presentation here because I usually attend the Open Source Summit in the US or Europe, but it is a very rare opportunity to attend the other regions Open Source Conference. And so I'd like to say thank you to Kim-san. I can't see him, but and all attendees to give me an opportunity to make a presentation here. Thank you very much. And today I'll introduce our open source program office activities in Sony Group. And then I'll introduce maybe SPDX, SBOM format, recent topics. And I hope there are somewhat useful information for you. Okay. Before starting the session, let me introduce myself briefly. I am Norio Kobota from Sony Group Corporation, and I am a senior open source strategist for all Sony Group. And so usually I collaborate with and I help with our internal developers to solve the several open source issues. And at the same time, I joined as a Sony representative to OpenChain project, this T-shirt, and SPDX project. And OpenChain project is, some of you may know, solving the open source license compliance issues in the complex software supply chains. And SPDX is one of the major SBOM format. And so I'll make some contribution to those two open source projects. And this is today's my agenda. And firstly, I'll introduce our OSBO structure or OSBO activities, and then about our open source license clearance workflow. And at the last, I'll introduce some SBOM recent topics. It may be a little overlapped with the previous speakers, so I'll skip some slides. And open source program office. This is our open source program office structure. And left side is our real organization, and the right side is a virtual organization. As you know, there are many issues for related open source matters. So we need to collaborate and we need to tackle with many developers and IP department and legal persons. So firstly, we organized virtual community, virtual organization. It's left side, open source license committee for tackling the open source license clearance, and open source promotion working group to make a good relationship with the open source communities. But on the other hand, sometimes we need to make a contract between company and open source organization, like membership agreement or contributor license agreement. And sometimes we need to make a funding some open source communities. In such case, it is somewhat useful to have a real organization in the corporate side. So we have a real organization. It's called Open Source Promotion Section. And next slide is our global support structure. In the past and in the future, it was different and it will be changed. But currently, we have 3 people in the Europe and only 1 person in the US, and 6 members are located, supporting in the Japan. But as I explained, we have virtual organization. So also in the US, many persons help dedicated member. This head count is a dedicated member count. And this is a usual OSBO work. I guess this is similar to you. Firstly, we are providing consulting to solve the open source matters. And then next one is making internal rules or guidelines for tackling the open source matters. And third one is event planning. OSPO should encourage internal developers to work with open source communities. For those reasons, we are planning internal open source day for all Sony Group. So we have at least once a year, we plan an open source day for Sony Group people and make some developers to introduce their open source activities or inviting keynote speakers or some other famous people in the open source communities outside Sony. And of course, we are creating some open source training materials and provide them to not only developers, but also legal or IP department members. And this chart is provided by To-Do Group from in Linux Foundation. This is an OSPO maturity model. And OSPO should go upstairs for improving the open source matters. So we provide our services from this perspective. And currently, we are challenging strategy section. And if we contribute to some open source communities or how to adopt or how to make it better to work with open source communities, we need to convince the importance of the open source community to our upper manager, like C-level manager and so on. So we need to tackling strategy part. But today, it is not focused for this presentation, so I don't explain the details. But my colleague have already provided the presentation at the Open Source Summit. This is Europe, maybe. So if you are interested please check the YouTube video later. And if you are interested contact us again. We can. I'm not sure, but we can provide the details presentation. Next one is open source license clearance. This is the basic workflow for actual internal Sony Group open source license clearance workflow. As you know, open source license clearance is separated three parts. First one is gathering the open source licensing, open source information. And the next one is license clearance. And at the last, we need to prepare the compliance artifact, such as license terms and copyright notices and source code in some case. And all tasks will be done by the developers inside Sony Group. And we are define design organization and development organization. And the license reviewer, which consists of open source license committee people, support the developer from the license clearance process. And let's dive into the little bit details, open source license management. Firstly, developers create an open source list. First time, in many cases, developers use some tools to manage the open source list, but in some organizations, they don't have any tools to manage or operate the open source software. So we also provide a template to manage the open source software list. It is actually an Excel format. And then they gather the OSS information not only from the internal developers, but also the third parties. So open source list template defines minimum elements need to be know about the OSS. And after that, checking the dependencies. And this part, gathering OSS information, many developers tend to gather only the OSS information, only they are using. As you know, it is the surface of the OSS component in the product or services. After that, they need to check the dependencies. It's very hard. There are so many dependencies and so many open source software under the dependencies. So we recommend to use some tools such as FOSS-ID or SIFT, Host-Logi, BlackDuck, and so on to solve these checking the dependencies. It is a main focus point to use the tools. Of course, as a part, tools are very useful. But some part, especially to conclude the license part, it is very difficult only to solve with tools. And this is a license clearance process. Firstly, developers created all open source software list, previous process. After that, they check one by one. And this is a little bit difficult to explain, but in some industry, such as embedded system, we can use some licenses, actually. Like GPL version 3, version 3 can't be allowed in some kind of embedded products. So we also provide some specific open source license list, and then they exclude the open source software from the product. After that, they conclude the open source license with license summary we provided, and check all list. After that, the developers get all open source software list filled from the license compliance perspective. After that, they needed to prepare the compliance artifact. For several open source licenses, they get license summary, they refer to license summary or what should be done each open source license. They prepare the compliance artifact. But recently, security management should be done in this process. So the developer should check the vulnerability for each package this time. And the vulnerability information is fortunately or unfortunately provided by the other department. So after that, they will get all information, including security information, vulnerability information, after this process. And then they they prepare the compliant artifact, but we need to generate SBOM this timing. So the software bill of materials. And I'd like to skip because all of these attendees knows about SBOM, so I'll skip this slide today. So I'll introduce SBOM trends, recent topics. And as you know, SBOM format is, there are two major SBOM formats in the world. Of course, there are another SBOM formats introduced, but as far as I know, SPDX and CycloneDX are enough to support. And recently, on April this year, both formats released a new version. SPDX is released version 3.0, and CycloneDX is released version 1.6 on April. And the interoperability will getting better with both formats, but there are still some differences between the two formats. So OpenSSF under the Linux Foundation announced the ProtoBOM, a new abstraction layer to manage the SBOM format transparently without worrying about the difference between CycloneDX and SPDX. So if you want to operate both SPDX and CycloneDX, please check ProtoBOM. And I'd like to skip this slide because this is also introduced previous keynote speakers. But all over the world, public sector focused to generate and operate SBOM. It's recent trends. So in Sony, we are tackling SBOM creation and operating the SBOMs. It's not currently doing. But there are more practical issues. Because SBOM became to be able to handle many information. SBOM are started at the license compliance or security perspective, but as of now, SBOM can be included AI and model and data set and security, and even if functional safety from of the automotive industry. But at this time, at this moment, what item do we really need? And what item should we actually fill into the SBOM? Many people don't know this one. Many people can't answer this question. So today, I'd like to introduce SPDX Lite and the Lite profile after the version 3.0. This profile was introduced OpenChain Japan Working Group to SPDX Working Group. And this profile is implemented with the consideration, essentially, this profile defines the minimum items required to comply with open source license compliance perspective. But this profile designed to meet the requirements of regulations and guidelines all over the world. This is SBOM property comparison from the several regulations and guidelines. So we research regulations in the world and check what property should be filled in the SBOM. After that, check the elements and implement into a Lite profile. So if we use the Lite profile, we can fulfill or satisfy each regulations. It is the intention to create a Lite profile. And moreover, it is based on the license compliance, but we create an actual sample to mix with the security profile or AI profile and contribute to the actual SBOM JSON LD file to SPDX project and check with them it is correct or not. It is continuing to discuss now. But, however, due to our English skill in Japanese community, and the time zone of the meeting schedule. The SPDX working group meeting usually held in US and Europe time zone. So it's a little difficult to attend generally to SPDX tech meeting. So light profile, understanding of light profiles is not widespread. This is the article when SPDX 3.0 was published. But this is light profile section, but the document section is usage profile. What is that? Okay, so we, Japan working group, like to start promotional activities all over the world. This is one activity. Okay, that's all from my presentation. Thank you very much.
시간이 나는 관계로 질문을 받으려고 하는데 혹시 질문 있으신 분 계실까요? 공식 통역이 진행되기 때문에 부담 없이 배우셔도 되는데